There's a big difference between an individual who's stranded in the middle of the sea and has flares on the boat and chooses to use those flares or even thinks about a way to use the flares versus an individual who's on the boat, has the flares and refuses to use them. What's the difference? The difference is what they're telling themselves in that moment when they're stranded. Have they succumbed to victimization? Do they feel like they're a victim? Do they feel like they can't do anything? Do they feel that all hope is lost? Are they so afraid that the fear has consumed them to the point where they are immobile and they cannot even perform a simple action of thinking, what can I do to prolong my chances of survival? Does this sound familiar? Most of us tend to be like that person who has the flares on the boat but refuses to use the flares. A lot of us would like to believe that we're the person who actually lights the flares, immediately thinks about anchoring the boat or trying to figure out other means and ways of living or trying to stay alive. But the truth is, most of us are captivated by fear. Most of us become immobilized by the very fear itself. And most of us go into victim mode. Most of us internalize our problems and the things that are happening around us, and we take those things in and we allow them to cripple who we are. Now, remember this, I'm the first person to say that I've been there. I've been in situations where I felt so hopeless, or I felt that I couldn't do anything, but I knew that I had to. I knew within myself that if I chose to remain where I was and not use those flares, that all hope would be lost, and that I'm the only one that had the ability to contrive or to build that hope. What's your narrative? What's your story? Today, I want to talk about your narrative. Most of us tell ourselves things from the time we're young. Most of us have a story in our mind. You know, when I was young, I used to envision certain people in my classroom. They would talk about their homes, and I had this vision that I developed from the stories they would tell. Their storytelling was so captivating that it made me create vivid constructs in my mind of what their home would look like. I remember having one friend, her name was Charmaine, and she would always talk about how beautiful her home was, blah, blah, blah. She went on for hours. And one day I got the luxury of going to her home. In my mind, I was excited. I couldn't wait to go to her house. And when I got there, guess what? It was a big letdown. Her home was nothing like what I thought it was. It was a home. It was a good home. But in my mind, I had constructed this whole image that was contradictory to the reality that I was facing. How many of you do that? How many of you have created a narrative in your head and built up this story that is so believable that even you yourself start believing your own story? How many of you have a story that you haven't debunked yet? How many of you are such great storytellers to the point where your story has taken root and taken a life of its own? It is time to reassess your narrative. It's time to look at your story and change that story. You know, when you're dealing with other people, one of the interesting facts that I have come to understand is that if your story is okay, if your story is based on reality and not dysfunction or some kind of delusion, then you have a better chance of surviving, regardless of the situation you find yourself in. That's what I teach. I teach the truth. It's all about truth. It's all about how you recognize the truth, how you're able to handle the truth, and how you're able to project back out to others that truth which you believe. But if your story doesn't have, or I should say is not built on the truth, then everything that's happening to you is happening to you not from a realistic perspective, but from the perspective that you created. Does that make sense? I'm not calling you delusional in the least. I'm saying that we have created such stories and such constructs around ourselves and in our minds that construct, especially if it's an unrealistic one, it detracts from the truth of our very existence and day-to-day living. Here's the other thing. If your story is realistic, then you would have the ability to change your behavior at any point in that scenario. And in changing your behavior, you can affect somebody else's behavior. You truly can. Your behavior can dictate how the other person chooses to treat you, to respond to you, or how you sort through that whole aspect of what you're going through right now. Of course, Ingrid, you're going to say there's situations where you don't understand that there's nothing you can do. There's situations that I have encountered during the process of doing the work I do, where I know that there's some people that truly don't have hope unless somebody else is sent by, unless they see a boat coming their direction, because they don't have the ability to light the flare, because something has broken them or something has prevented them from even having the ability to even think about using the flare to get out. I understand those situations, but the situations I'm talking about today are the situations that you have created for yourself, or the situations that you find yourself in where you have some measure of power, but refuse to acknowledge that you have that power. Okay. A lot of times I remember years ago when I got into a relationship, the main purpose of me getting into that relationship was because I was tired. I was tired of doing things by myself. This was almost 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, but I was tired. I was at the point where I didn't want to go through this life alone. I felt like if I had somebody at my side, that I could be stronger, I could be better, I could be more motivated. And I was, for a time, all a little bit of time, I was all those things, but then eventually everything fell apart because my narrative was not built on the foundation that is required to have a healthy relationship. My narrative was built on these things. First of all, I had a victim mentality. I felt like I needed to be saved. I felt like, I had done everything I had to do, and it was somebody else's time to take care of me. It was somebody else's time to show up and do for me what I didn't want to do for myself anymore. That's where I found myself. And the other thing I had was this savior complex kicked in, because when I realized that I couldn't afford to be a victim because the person needed me to save them, then I became the savior. I wanted to save them from themselves. That went bad really quickly. And then all the things that prompted me in that relationship, it just was a recipe for disaster. I was building a story that was bound to have not a happy ending. I had a fear of being alone. I had a fear of being rejected, a fear of being abandoned, and all those issues, the victimization, the savior mentality, and all the fears I possessed led me down a rabbit hole where I spent years trying to come out of. All I'm saying to you is check yourself. Take an inventory of the reasons why you're doing what you're doing. Check your narrative. What have you been telling yourself? Are you truly believing that you are a victim? Because if you're a victim, why the heck would you try to go into a relationship knowing that you have this mentality? Because all you're going to attract, like I say, pain attracts pain, and fear attracts fear. Dolls can smell fear in human beings, and it responds to that fear. And there's some human beings that have the same ability to recognize your brokenness and be attracted to that brokenness, because that's an advantage for them. Remember, this is a world where the strong will survive, and the strong survive by preying off the weak. It's just reality. Change your story. Get it from where you are. Despite what you're going through, despite what you've endured, despite what is happening right now in your life, you have a choice. Choose to change your story. Choose to change your narrative. Let your narrative not be one where you're feeling so sorry for yourself that you cannot perform for yourself. Let your narrative be one where you understand the situation, you see the reality of the situation, and you address the situation from that reality instead of from the delusion that keeps you more to the floor and refuses to allow you to do anything for yourself. Get up, get unstuck. Stop pretending that you don't have the power within, because you do. Everyone has the power to change things, the power to affect things, the power to become the very thing that you know you can. My name is Ingrid Felton. As always, thank you for stopping by today. Thank you for subscribing to the YouTube videos. Thank you for liking the videos. Thank you for your comments. They're always welcome. And thank you for your support, because it's because of you that I continue doing these videos. Again, I hope that you take what I said to heart today. Change your narrative. Check your story. What is the story you're telling yourself first? Not just the story you're telling others. Start with self. Every great work and every great outcome starts with you. Have a great day. Bye.